Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Grant Management and Budget webinar. The Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, or JMHCP, is a very important initiative to help reduce the prevalence of mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorders that are in our criminal justice system, and to further promote collaborations between organizations in both the criminal justice and mental health systems. After the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please type the question into the question and answer panel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions. If your questions do not get answered during the webinar, please follow up via email after the event has ended. At the end of the presentation, we will provide email addresses for everyone speaking today, as well as a list of resources on what we've spoken about. If you encounter technical or audio problems during the webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. Please understand that there are some technical issues you may not be able to resolve. For this reason, we are recording the event and will be posting it, emailing out the recording and posting it for all attendees on our website shortly after. So today we have a number of speakers from various agencies on the webinar to give you comprehensive answers to information. We have Cynthia Kimmelman DeVries, who's a Deputy Program Director of Behavioral Health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. We also have Maria Fryer, Justice Systems and Corrections Policy Advisor for Substance Abuse and Mental Health at the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the U.S. Department of Justice. Nikisha Love, Lead State Policy Advisor for Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program at the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the U.S. Department of Justice. Vanessa West, Senior Research Associate at CSR Incorporated. Michael Williams, Staff Accountant and Trainer at the Office of Justice Programs in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. And I am Sarah Wurzberg. I'm a Grantee Technical Assistance Manager in Behavioral Health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The goal for today's presentation is to cover a number of topics that potential JMHCP applicants as well as current grantees often face. First, we'll talk about getting started in maintaining federal registrations. Then we'll go into different budget categories, budget narratives, and budget worksheet details. Also, we will discuss budget clearance issues. We'll then go into using the Grants Management System, or GMS, and contacting your program manager. We'll also talk about training and technical assistance provided to JMHCP grantees and when you should ask your TA provider for help. Then we'll talk about the Bureau of Justice Assistance Performance Management. And then we will have time for questions and answers. Finally, we'll have contact information for Department of Justice as well as subcontracting agencies at the end of the webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to review the budget development and budget management information beneficial to applicants and award recipients. It provides practical resources for successful grant program implementation. Now I'm going to pass it off to Maria Fryer from the Bureau of Justice Assistance.
Thanks, Sarah. Successful implementation depends on current federal registration, an approved budget, proactively resolving program and budget issues, engaging available resources when needed, and managing budget adjustment requests. So just a note on federal registrations. Federal registrations needed to apply are most often maintained by the applicant agency, such as the state, city, county, or tribe. Federal registrations are considered a pre-application task that can have post-award implications if not maintained and maintained currently. Another pre-application task that is not listed but important is getting approval to apply according to local policy and procedure, such as requests to local boards and leadership. And this can take time and should be considered early in the application process. Finding out who maintains federal registrations will help to discover who has the authority to apply and where requests should be made at the local level. Next slide. Getting started and maintaining federal registration. Next slide. So outlined here are 5 steps in the application process. Step 1, DUNS number, and Step 2, SAM's registration, will need to remain current throughout the life of your grant project, as it can affect drawdown. Slide. Next slide, please. The next section we will talk about is developing a solid budget for your program. We will cover each part of a successful budget and additional considerations when developing a budget. And now I would like to turn the presentation over to Michael from OCFO. Michael?
Thank you, Maria. Next slide, please. What I would like to talk about now is how to develop a successful budget or building a better budget. Normally in OCFO, we do experience a lot of times that applications are held up because there is missing information or not clearly identifying actual costs in the application. So my goal is to try to give you an idea of the preparations or the aspects that you should go through in order to build that better budget. I want you to keep in mind that creating a budget or building your budget should be thought of similar to your own personal home budget that you build. I want to say the principles are the same. The categories may be different, but the principle is the same, and I say that for this reason. What we're talking about is projecting costs in the future. As I have here, predictions is very difficult, especially if you're talking about anything in the future. So I always like to say it is your best guesstimate as to what you intend to happen in some future period. Next slide, please. So in planning a successful program budget, we'll talk about a few things: the who, what, the where, when, why, and how. So all of these things need to be incorporated in the budget application that you're submitting so that the analyst that is reviewing your application can understand what it is you're actually doing and whether or not the cost associated with what you're proposing makes sense. We'll talk about budget categories. Now, again, these budget categories are the ones that we normally see, or the ones that we normally use in the OCFO's office in order to pull these applications together and approve these budgets. The budget narrative is very, very important. That is, if I'm looking at the application and within the budget categories, and I may have questions about certain things in the budget categories, I can always go and refer to the budget narrative, hopefully to get more specific information, hopefully to avoid sending back an application for more detailed information because it's lacking that. Then next, the budget detail worksheet. This is where we're pulling everything together, our computations, everything in order to come up with the total cost of this particular project. In some cases, and especially this one, programs are required to put in match, okay? So I'll talk about various types of matches and identify them because they must be identified and broken out into your application as well. Next slide. Sorry, I'm having difficulties. 1 second. So, looking at the standard budget categories or formats. Next slide. Back one. The standard budget categories and formats. Based in OJP, this is technically what we are normally looking for in reference to your application. Personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual. Now, contractual has some other items that we will discuss in there. What we tried to do was make it more user-friendly or to break it out so you could specifically understand what it is we were looking for in this particular category, because it consists of multiple things or can consist of multiple things. Then I always like to say the other category. So if it didn't fit neatly in the budget categories that we just talked about, then as a catch-all category, the other category is what I'm going to suggest that we use. And then the indirect cost. The program allows indirect cost, and you have an indirect cost rate, then that information needs to be reflected here. Based on the new uniform guidance, there is something known now as a de minimis 10% indirect cost rate, which we will discuss later. Next slide. So let's look at personnel. In the personnel category, it's important to list the position and titles and the names of the individuals that's going to be working on a grant program. I understand in some cases that that information as far as the actual individual may not be available. So at a minimum, the position and title should be there. Now keep in mind, some programs require that you identify key personnel. So if key people identified in the application must be identified up front, then make sure that you list these individuals. It is also important that at any time that a key personnel leaves your agency or working on this particular program, that the funding source must be made aware as soon as possible. Again, when you're working with personnel, you want to show the annual salary and any percentage of time that these individuals will be working on this particular program. Now, this part is very, very important. When I talk about percentage of time that an individual will be working on a program, let's just say hypothetically that an individual will be working 50% of their time on this particular program, and then with your organization, they will be working the other 50%. Now, even though I use the term 50-50, and sometimes that's what we see, hopefully there has been a time study of this person's particular time in order to come up with these actual percentages. The most important thing to keep in mind if you're going to transfer an individual from working within your organization to a grant program, that you backfill this person's percentage of time that they're going to be working on this particular program. If not, you run the risk of supplanting, which I will cover later in this program. Compensation paid to employees that are engaged in the program, in this actual program, again, should be paid for similar work that your organization currently has. Next slide, please. Fringe benefits. Here's something that should be listed as well in the application: the actual fringe benefits that will be paid to individuals, or the actual rate that your organization has for your fringe benefits package. Fringe benefits should be directly related to those folks in the personnel category above. Next slide. Travel. Now, the travel category allows you to travel for this particular program, so you want to make sure that you are as detailed as possible. So, for example, if we're talking about someone that needs to travel to any type of training or something related to the program, if they're going to be gone for a number of days, then all of the computations need to be reflected. So I'm talking about hotel stays, any type of travel, whether we're talking about air, train, or a individual's personal vehicle that's actually being used. Per diem, in a travel mode, away from your home and away from your work site, per diem can kick in. So this means that you're able to claim so much for meals while you're away from your home or business site. Identify the location of any travel that you're going to, and I always want to say be concerned about this particular category, and I'm going to use the term, here is where you may be able to build in flexibility. And filling out an application today that will be awarded, let's say at the end of the year or sometime next year, knowing what airfare is and hotel cost stays will be sometime in the future is very hard to estimate. So what you want to do is use a travel.com website, find out what the actual travel would be, and then you want to add some type of flexibility or increase for that to take in consideration that costs will go up in the future. The last thing to keep in mind is that your agency should have a developed travel policy. Okay? If you don't have a established travel policy, then we require that you follow the federal guidelines for travel. Next slide, please. Now, equipment. The thing to remember about equipment is that some programs do allow you to purchase equipment to work on these particular programs. But I encourage you that if you already have this existing equipment within your organization, that you do not buy or duplicate this equipment within your organization. Now, when I talk about equipment, I'm always referring to the federal definition for equipment. The federal definition for equipment is this equipment must have a useful life of more than 1 year and have a fair market value of $5,000 or more. In most cases, if your organization has its own equipment policy, then it would probably be similar in one case, and here's what I mean. It's probably similar that your equipment must have a useful life of more than one year, but its fair market value may be quite less than the $5,000 threshold that you see here on the screen. It could be $700, $1,000, whatever the fair market value of your agency's equipment is must be reflected. Now, if you're going to follow your agency's policy and procedures for equipment, you must let us know up front that you're following your agency's policy and procedures for equipment, because if not, remember I said I have my federal hat on, so if it does not meet the federal threshold, then I'm going to move it out of equipment and put it down into supplies. If you're allowed to buy equipment with the federal grant, you must track it for its entire life, the life of the grant, and when it's that, and put it like this, when you no longer have a need for that particular equipment, then the funding source of the federal government would like to know about its disposition requirements. And here's what they are. The goal is when you buy equipment with federal funds, we hope that you'll use it for as long as you have a need for it, even after the grant is closed, unless the grant special conditions specifies something different. But if you no longer have a need for it and its value is $5,000 or more, you must contact the federal agency for disposition requirements. Next slide, please. Supplies. Now, again, remember what I said, that if based on the federal guideline for equipment, if it didn't fall into that frame, then I will move it out of equipment and put it in supplies. Now, if we're talking about supplies, we need to list all the items identified as supplies. So whether we're talking about office supplies, postage, training, whatever they are, they need to be shown along with their compensation computation. Here is something that slows up or can slow up the review process. I'll give you a hypothetical situation. Let's just say that in supplies you've listed out everything, but based on the actual cost of this particular item, it may, I'll use the term, raise a red flag. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say that you have postage in supplies, and the postage is for $8,000. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be that, but just from my standpoint, looking at it, $8,000 appears to be excessive. However, in some cases, you may have to provide some additional justification to help the analyst understand the purpose of this high cost for postage. So let's just say that your organization is responsible for generating newsletters that you're sending out to the community on a regular basis, okay? So based on that computation, that allows the analyst to understand why the postage line item is so high. Next slide, please. Construction. Normally, construction is not allowed under an OJT or Department of Justice grants. There are a few, so you want to make sure that if you're dealing with a grant program that allows construction, that that's what you're doing and you understand the special conditions associated with that. Now, we use this particular category because in some cases, minor repairs and or renovation is allowed under a grant program. So again, if that's the case, you want to note that you're actually doing renovation and not construction. Next slide, please. In this particular category here, consultants and contracts, we are working on this based on the new guidance to give you a clear idea of what we're actually looking for in this particular section. So let's start first with consultants, okay? Consultants, for the most part, what we're talking about is an individual that will be working on, that you will be passing grant funds to. The thing to remember is that an individual can possibly be providing a service to the organization, and here's what I mean to the organization, accounting services, or the individual can be actually implementing a portion of the grant, which is better known as a subrecipient, which I will talk about later. But normally when we're talking about consultant fees, we're talking about identifying the name or of the individual that will be working on this particular program. The rate of pay is basically structured for an 8-hour day. Currently, the Department of Justice consultant rate is at a rate of $650 per day. I need to make it clear that that is the maximum rate that you can pay without prior approval. But I want to make sure that everyone understands that when we're paying consultants, we should be paying consultants what they are worth and not what the federal grant program will allow. Next slide, please. Contracts. When we're talking about contracts, in most cases, we're talking about now an organization. So let's just say IBM. So you're going to contract with IBM to provide laptops that we're going to use within this program. Based on that, that's a contract of a vendor or a procurement type of nature. IBM will not be working on the program, but they'll actually be providing you with this computer so that you can do your day-to-day function on this particular grant program. So in this is a true procurement relationship as opposed to a consultant relationship. The thing to keep in mind that if you're doing a contract, based on your agency's procurement policy, and I mean that if you put a solicitation out on the street and only one response is received based on that solicitation, and that amount is for $150,000 or more, you need to request prior approval, or you have sole source, and you need prior approval before you can move forward with that particular contract. Next slide, please. Again, in this same category of G under contractual, we now have subawards or subrecipients. What I mean in this is that you will be entering into an agreement with another agency and or individual that will be performing an aspect of that particular grant. A subaward I have here is not a contract, but it may be, because you have to have some type of legal agreement with the subrecipient that spells out what is going to be done or what is expected out of them. Again, as I said, the purpose of the subaward is to carry out a portion of the federal award, okay? The new guidance says that you should be more concerned with the substance of work that is being performed as opposed of the legal instrument that you're actually using. And I say that because we can enter into multiple agreements where the individual or agency that is providing the service to be a subrecipient could be a memorandum of understanding, could be a contract. It could be if your organization has documentation for the subrecipient types of agreements. But again, we're more concerned with what is being performed as opposed to the legal instrument. Because if we're talking about a true subrecipient, the FFATA requirements, the Federal Funding Transparency Act requires that you report all subrecipients that you pay in excess of $25,000 or more in the FFATA subaward payment system. Next slide, please. H, the other category which I talked about. So if you still have items that did not fall neatly in the categories that we just talked about, it needs to be put in the other category. Now, in the other category, the same rules apply as opposed to identifying the item, the computation for it. So, for example, if we're talking about utilities, then when we're saying utilities, we're talking about each month or throughout the whole year and what that amount is. So all of that needs to be identified. And another example possibly could be rent. So, for example, provide the square footage of the cost of that area that you're going to be using, and that will give you what that cost for rent should be monthly. Next slide, please. Indirect costs. Now, indirect costs can be allowable under a grant program. In order to charge indirect costs back to a grant program, you must have an approved indirect cost rate negotiated by your cognizant federal agency. Your cognizant federal agency will be the agency that provides you with the most federal funding, okay? Now, I talked earlier about the new uniform guidance that does now allow organizations that have never negotiated an indirect cost rate to use what they want to call the de minimis and or 10% of modified total direct cost on your particular grant program. However, if you do meet the requirements in order to charge the de minimis rate, you must notify the awarding agency that you are electing to charge the de minimis rate against your particular program, and you may be required to certify that you are using the modified total direct cost method in order to do that. The most important thing to remember about indirect costs or the de minimis rate, costs must be consistently charged as either direct or indirect and cannot be charged as both. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about match. Dealing with a grant program, match may be required. Match is a way of having the applicant buy in to the actual program and support the efforts of a particular program. So in order to find out your actual amount of match that you need to put in, what you need to actually know is the amount of the award that the funding source is going to provide to you. You need to find out what the percentage of that in reference to the total project cost, okay? So in the examples that you'll see off to the side, 1, 2, and 3, by doing that, if you know the amount of the award and what percentage it represents, by dividing that, you come up with the adjusted project cost. Based on that, if you multiply the percentage of that matching requirement, it will give you your required match. So again, as you can look at the examples on the side, we're talking about a grant program or the grant that's going to be funded for $200,000, but it represents 80% of the award, which gives you a total adjusted project cost of $250,000. So $250,000 multiplied by the 20%, which is the matching requirement, will give you the $50,000 and or the match requirement that is required by the applicant. Now, based on how you plan on putting match into the program, you need to identify that in each budget category that you plan on putting these local dollars into the program so that it's clear that not only that you will meet the matching requirement, but in each category that the match will be reflected in. Next slide, please. Budget narrative. Remember I told you how important the budget narrative is. Now, I'm going to show you a detailed budget worksheet. In some of the budget categories, there is a small section of blank space that I encourage you to use to explain certain things in that particular category. It's not a requirement, but the thing is if you do, it may assist me if I'm experiencing issues understanding the cost or the relevance of certain things in a particular category. If not, then I am required to stop my review, go to the budget narrative, and hopefully retrieve this information that I need to make a decision on that particular budget category. So the budget narrative should tell the purpose of this particular program, the process that you will go through in implementing this program, and your expected outcomes or goals with implementing this program. Next slide, please. Here is that sample budget detail worksheet. As you can see, this one is talking about or reflecting personnel and fringe benefits. So all of the categories and the computations and the dollar amounts should be reflected in there. And again, here's what I truly, truly encourage that you do. Prior to hitting submit for your application, I would encourage you to have someone in your organization, but someone in your organization far enough removed from the program that you're applying for so that they can objectively look at what you're applying for. If they can understand what it is that you have in your budget detail worksheet, it's a good chance that it will move through our organization without any problems. The reason why I suggest that you have someone far enough removed from the program is because sometimes we will give it to someone who understands the program, and they may gloss over our errors or our mistakes, where someone far enough removed, if they come to you and say, I'm not truly understanding what you mean here, then I would change that, because 9 times out of 10, we would probably experience that same thing in OCFO while reviewing your application. Next slide, please. Budget clearance issues. So that brings me to common errors that we note in OCFO. Next slide. So I've put together the 10 top reasons why budgets don't clear initially. Again, number one, as you can see, the budget detail worksheet is missing. The applicant forgot to submit that as part of their package. The detail worksheet computations are incorrect. If match is required for this particular program, it has not been identified or calculated within the budget so that the analyst can see where it is in the actual application. Unallowable costs are included in the detail worksheet, and the required breakdown by category has not been included. Next slide, please. And when I say the required breakdown, I'll give you an example of one. Sometimes we see where an application comes in, and let's just say that the fringe benefit rate is 36%. So that's what I'll see in that category. So when I'm talking about breaking it down, I need to know what's all inclusive in that 36%, because I need to make sure that you do not have any unallowable cost buried in that fringe benefits total, okay? Incomplete budget narrative, financial management and internal control questionnaire form has not been submitted. Now, this is for all OJP applicants. What we're doing now is a part of a risk assessment within the Office of Justice Programs. We're having grantees fill this out or applicants fill this out because we're looking at the type of accounting system and other policy and procedures you have in place to make sure that you are capable of being responsible for federal funds. Prior budgets did not clear. Now, this one is a little different, and I mean this, is that the original budget that you submitted, we had questions, but there were no responses to those. And now supplemental funding is being asked for, so I won't be able to, I can approve the supplemental funding, but you won't be able to start because the original budget has not passed or was not cleared. The current federally approved indirect cost rate, if you're not using the de minimis rate, is not current or is not submitted with the application. And a response for the initial financial review wasn't sufficient enough, and this one actually ties in to number 8. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Michael, just want to make sure that you're still on. We can't hear you at the moment.
You can't hear me?
Oh, there you go, and we're back. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Supplanting. Remember I talked about supplanting earlier in reference to a person working a percentage of their time on a grant program, okay? So DOJ funds must not be used to supplant existing funds for your program. And when I talk about existing programs, your organization is already funding this particular program, so the grant that you're applying for should supplement or enhance your current efforts. They cannot replace what you already have appropriated or funding for this particular program. So it should increase your efforts and not replace them. So again, when I talk about moving a person from their current position for a particular amount of or percentage of their time on this particular program, the rule is that you must backfill any of their positions. So let's go back to the 50-50 percentage that I use. So if you move employee X to the grant program for 50% of employee X time, someone needs to replace employee X 50% of the time that they will not be in their original job category. So that's what I mean about backfilling. If we do not backfill that position, then that's known as supplanting. Next slide, please. And as you can see here in my example, funds are appropriated for a stated purpose and federal funds are awarded for that same purpose. The agency then replaces its funds with federal funds, thereby reducing the total amount available for the stated purpose. So if you're doing that, then we consider that supplanting. Next slide, please. Changes to grant award. This is very, very important for this reason. When I first started off, I talked about a budget or application being your best guesstimate. So based on the time that you actually get this program up and running, and let's just say it's 8 months to a year later, things have changed within your organization based on what you put in the actual applications, so you may need to make some changes. So we understand that, so this is where you can make changes to your award. And the first one says that you can change up to 10%, or we have something called the 10% rule. We understand because of these changes that I might need to make changes. So you can make changes up to 10% without prior approval. I never like that flexibility that we do allow you. I think anytime that you make a change on your particular grant program, you should notify your program manager. I think that you and the program manager should be on the same page of changes that you're going to make against a program. Why? Because the second bullet, sometimes I can make a change that's less than 10%, but I might change the scope or the intent of that particular program. Now, I have on here that it does not apply to grants that are less than $150,000. Why? And this is why I encourage you to talk to the program manager, because sometimes you're more likely to change the scope of the program because of the lesser dollar amount of that particular grant. So I want to say as a good practice, you always want to reach out to the program manager and at least bring them on board with your thoughts of making changes. A no-cost extension normally is popular because based on grantees actually receiving their award documents on the actual start date is a little rare. We are working on that to be better about that, but sometimes you will not receive it on the start date. So it's common for you to ask for more time. Let's just say that your grant is for 12 months. You receive it on the 10th month and you need those 12 months. So you would ask for a no-cost extension, I want to say 60 days out before the grant expires, because then you're in a better position to understand how much more time you'll need to successfully implement this program. Grant adjustment notice is also needed to retire special conditions. Since I'm financial, I want to say be mindful of the financial ones. The one that is most popular is that the recipient cannot expend, obligate, or draw down funds until something happens, okay? So you want to make sure that you are in compliance with that particular special condition. Next slide, please. Next slide. Did you lose me again?
We can still hear you.
Back one. Changes to the indirect cost category. OJP has a rule that any money into or out of indirect costs will always require prior approval. That is also consistent with an application that comes in that has a $0 category in it. So let's just say, for example, that your application comes in with personnel, fringe benefits, and travel. but you want to put money into equipment because now you realize that you need some equipment. In order to do that, it will always be prior approval. Change of the authorizing signing official. If that person in your organization changes, you need to get a grant adjustment notice to reflect that. Change in mailing address, organization's name, and any other types of prior approvals that you need, you always want to make sure that you do a grant adjustment notice for that. Next slide, please. Pass-through entity's responsibility. Back when I was talking about subrecipients, it's important that you understand your role if you're dealing with subrecipients, okay? The most important thing, you must have an established policy as to how you're going to make the subawards, how you're going to go out and monitor them, and how you're going to hold them accountable for their part of the work. There should be an evaluation of subrecipients for their risk of noncompliance with the actual program. The only way to truly tell that is to do some type of monitoring of your subrecipients. Advise them of any supplemental requirements that you may have. Now, you want to make sure that your subrecipients follow, at a minimum, the federal guidelines. But you may have some additional requirements that you impose on them. Let's just say that prior to them being reimbursed, they need to send you detailed documentations of all the costs that they've incurred. And again, I talked about the FFATA, the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. If you award a subrecipient or make a subrecipient award of $25,000 or more, you have 30 days in order to put that subaward in the FFATA system. Next slide, please. Reporting requirements. There are several reporting requirements, and you want to make sure that you're in compliance with all of them, because if not, then the funding source from a financial perspective will be cut off to you. So there's a federal financial report that's due quarterly, and you have 30 days to get that in. Progress reports, you want to look at your your award document to see what type of progress reports that you're required to do. There are two kinds, but more than likely you'll probably be doing the semi-annual, because some programs will allow an annual. But again, if you're doing the semi-annual, you have 30 days in order to get that in. And performance measures, okay? You tracking your performance on a particular grant program. As you can see, there are two different methods in order to get those into the Office of Justice Programs. Next slide, please. Then closeouts. So as you can see, we went through the entire life cycle of a grant, from applying for grants, reporting on grants, and the importance of closing out your grants, okay? So award recipients have 90 days in order to close out their grants. This next bullet talks about if it's not closed within 90 days, on the 91st day, the program office will do what we consider a administrative closeout. You never want to allow your grant to go into a administrative closeout, because it doesn't look good with your organization that the funding source had to close out your grant, okay? So recipients will receive reminders. That's the good thing about GMS. It will send you reminders that you're nearing the closeout phase. The closeout is here, and that now it has passed. So be mindful of those reminders in GMS when they ask you or inform you about what's required on your grant program. Next slide, please. In GMS, there are 5 things that you need to know in order to close out your grant. You need to submit a final progress report, a final federal financial report, special condition compliance. There's some programs that require that prior to closing out your grant, there's a special condition that to make sure that you are in compliance with certain objectives of that particular grant program. Financial reconciliation. I want to make sure that I'll use the term all 3 pots of money agree. what was awarded, what was spent on the grant program, and what was drawn down from the U.S. Treasury. And then last, programmatic requirements. If your particular program requires some type of programmatic certification, you want to make sure that you're in compliance with that. So once these 5 things, and it could be 4 because the last one may not be a requirement of your particular program, and you do not need to do anything if that's the case for this particular one, but you want to make sure that you're in compliance with all of this to now officially submit the closeout package so that the funding source can begin the closeout process. Next slide, please. Now, that concludes my presentation on this. So I'll now turn it back over to Maria.
Thank you, Michael. So now we get into the part about receiving an award and launching successfully. Next slide, please. Your application has gone through the review process and you have just been approved for an award. EMS automatically issues the notifications at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the award date. The email notification includes detailed instructions on how to access and view the award documents and how to accept the award in GMS. You have 45 days from the award date to accept the OJP award document, or the award may be rescinded. To accept an award from OJP, you must log into the GMS and designate a financial point of contact, and you can use the link on the screen. Next slide, please. Immediate post-award actions. Carefully read all the special conditions. There are standard special conditions, and then there are conditions sometimes just applicable to JMHCP. Make note of programmatic and financial withholding. Any questions should be directed to your program manager or policy advisor, and you should not incur or expend funds prior to the start date on the award without prior approval. It's really important to familiarize yourself with the DOJ Grants Financial Guide, and the link is on the screen. Both the general and the financial point of contact need to complete a financial training within the first 120 days of the grant. Pre-agreement costs and costs incurred by the applicant prior to the date of the period of performance of the federal award. Regarding prior costs or costs incurred prior to the start date, OJP does not typically approve pre-agreement costs. An applicant must request and obtain the prior written approval of OJP for all such costs. All such costs incurred prior to the award date are at the sole risk of the applicant. Next slide, please. Communication is really important, and to get what you need, it's important to get to the right source. Successful implementation relies on submitting requests and products for approval through GMS perhaps, or discussing a change of scope with your training and technical assistance provider, or requesting documentation on confidentiality, for instance, through the policy office. Depending on the task, some things can be done independently, and others require coordination between all these offices that you've heard from today. And now I would like to turn the presentation over to Nikisha Love, the State Policy Advisor and Program Manager at BJA. Nikisha?
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Using GMS and contacting your program manager, which could be myself, Nikisha Love, or Veronica Munson. Next slide, please. Using the grants management system. Now, most of you have already gone through the pre-award process, and some of you may be getting ready to get started. So through pre-award, you would submit your application, of course. You would go through the award processing and then peer review. Once your application has been accepted, then that's when we come into post-award. This is when you would be notified that you have now received the grant, and that I, myself, Nikisha Love, will be your grant manager or Veronica Munson. We will discuss GANs, just as Michael had discussed with you all. That was a few GANs that you can go into the grants management system to do. Financial reporting, progress reporting, grant monitoring, which myself and Veronica will conduct from the beginning of the award until the end of closeout. We are your first contact, direct line of communication. Any changes that need to be made to your award, any other questions that you may have concerning your award will be directed to myself or Veronica. Next slide, please. Program office approval. Now, program office approval GANs are mostly used in the process of where you really don't have too much of the scope changed to your grant award, but you have some changes that require program office to approve. So this is when you will submit a program office approval award. GAN, sorry about that. Now, when Michael had mentioned the 10% rule, although it's not required that you all submit a GAN for just to move 10%, but for record retention purposes, it's best that you submit a program office approval GAN only if it's for less than the 10%, you're in the 10%, less than the 10%, and these are on approved cost budget categories, which means that all of the categories have already been approved and you just want to move money from supplies to other or any of that. But if you're zeroing out the supplies category and you want to add in equipment, then you will have to submit a budget modification GAN. That's just the same as if you're going in and you want to change your indirect costs. That will require a budget modification GAN. Let me say that again. Only if you're moving 10% or less than 10% of budget approved cost category items that you will not have to submit a budget modification GAN unless you're zeroing out a category, you're adding in a new budget category, or you're changing the indirect cost rate. Then that will initiate you submitting a budget modification GAN. Change in scope. Now, if you change the scope of the project, that means that you have already discussed this with your TTA provider, and policy has been in loop with this also, and I have been notified of these changes. So this is a process that you will have to go through, not just with you submitting a change of scope. This was something that, again, you had discussed with your TTA provider, policy, and myself. Point of contact change. This is very important to the program and the success because GMS is your first direct communication, which means that all notices come from GMS when it's time for you to submit reports, GANs, any changes made to the award will be through GMS and communication will come from GMS. So it's very important that all lines of communication, everyone has been updated. The point of contact in GMS is the person who does the day-to-day. That would be programmatic. This is the person who is making sure the program is being implemented and they're working with the subrecipients, the contractors, or the consultants. This is the point of contact. This is the programmatic person. Authorized official, authorized representative, the same thing. This is the person who has the signature authority to sign off on monetary federal awards for the organization, the county, or the state. This is the person who is responsible for making sure that the monies is being implemented as it should be. Financial point of contact, this is the person who's submitting the financial reports and who's coming in to draw down the funding. Now, with all three of these roles, there should be 3 different people acting in each one of these positions. No one person should be able to function under 2 or more of these roles. And we ask this because this can become an issue when you're trying to make sure the systems, everybody has system control. One person should not be able to control the whole award cycle. Project period GANs. These are no-cost extensions. No-cost extensions are requested, again, Michael had mentioned that, if you have a delay with receiving grant funding or getting your budget approved or having special conditions removed, then you will come in for a project no-cost extension. Now, a project no-cost extension means that you're asking for extension beyond the end of the project, not to request a change in the start of the project. All grant awards typically start on October 1st. So which means that is the actual start date, and we cannot change the start date because your actual budget was not approved until November the 20th. No, you can come in to request the end of the start date to be, the end of the project period to be pushed up for a, 6 months to a year. Typically, no-cost extensions are up to 12 months. Next slide, please. Activities or special conditions that need additional BJA approval. Publication approval. This can be found on your within your special conditions. So you can refer to those conditions, and that is titled Submission of BJA Published Materials, which gives you a little bit more detailed information on how to go about using that if needed. And that's the same as the conference training and other meetings. You will also require prior approval for those activities as well. And that can be found in your special conditions sections under conference costs, general requirements for OJP recipients. Next slide, please. Now, we spoke in reference to budgets, the budget process, not just for you all submitting GANs and modifications, but for the process of getting your budgets approved. Once OCFO does their review, they contact your grant manager, myself or Veronica, to let us know what findings they have found. And then we submit that information to you, the recipient, to get that information back to us. We ask that you read everything clearly and submit those documents just as the analyst has requested in order to get that process moving ahead. Reports, programmatic reports. The first report will be due on a quarterly basis because this is the first report. So that report will run from the cycle of October to December. But after that, they will run semi-annually. And these reports consist of the reports that you submit through the PMT. So any reports that you submit through PMT, these will be the reports that you are required to upload into GMS as your programmatic reports. GANs, we have already went into that. If you have like any other general questions on certain GANs, you can send me an email or Veronica to get a little bit more into depth on those. Closeouts. As we had mentioned earlier, you have 90 days after the end of the grant to do all of your reconciliation, to get everything done, to close the grant out. If you do not close the grant out on the 90th day, on the 91st day, GMS will automatically close the grant out for you. So we ask that you get everything in prior to, you can close the grant out earlier than 90 days. It doesn't matter, just as long as it's done before the 91st date. Next slide, please. Okay, this concludes my presentation, so I'll turn it back over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Nikisha, for the in-depth overview. So a little bit about BJA. Thank you. BJA's mission is to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development to support local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. The policy division is the part of BJA that focuses on a number of things, increasing collaboration, for sure, leveraging internal and external resources. Also, we focus on enhancing justice systems and getting the right people to the right programs at the right time. And for JMHCP in particular is treatment. We also focus on reducing unnecessary confinement and integrating research into program design and making funding recommendations. Next slide, please. Some additional functions of the BJA Policy Office are justice and mental health policy leadership and evidence-based approaches, grant making, as I mentioned, and technical assistance, curriculum development and delivery, and moving the field forward with translation of research, public and private partnerships, and establishing national resource centers to assist the field, such as the National Center on Justice-Involved Women and the National Reentry Resource Center and Pathways to Justice. The Policy Office contact is myself, Maria Fryer, who can be consulted on most issues having to do with planning and implementation and operations of your program. The Policy Office and myself work in conjunction with the Programs Office, that would be Nikisha, and your training and technical assistance provider. Next, we have Sarah from the CSG Justice Center to talk about technical assistance. Sarah?
Great, thank you, Maria. So I wanted to provide you with an overview of the Council of State Governments Justice Center role as it pertains to the grant program. Well, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, as your funder, oversees the grant management, selection, and awarding and maintenance of the individual grant. They contract with outside agencies to provide deeper technical and content expertise in areas of these programs related to planning and implementation, as well as performance metrics. Like you, we have applied for a grant through BJA to provide the JMHCP grantees with this content and technical expertise. The Council of State Governments Justice Center, we are excited to have been selected as the sole technical assistance provider, not only for the JMHCP program, but also the Second Chance Act program since their inceptions in 2004 and 2006, respectively. Combined between these two grant programs, we have worked with over 370 JMHCP awards and 700 Second Chance awards. Each grantee has a technical assistance coordinator who has monthly calls with the grantees, answers questions, and provides resources and training opportunities. The Council of State Governments is a bipartisan policy solution organization dedicated to all three branches of government, provide expertise on topics such as transportation and healthcare. In the Justice Center, we focus on issues related to criminal justice. Once applicants are accepted by BJA and awards are made, we work with BJA to assign you a technical assistance coordinator. Your technical assistance coordinator will work with you over the course of your grant and can do a number of things for you. We have monthly calls with JMHCP grantees in order to assist with planning and implementation efforts of this grant. This will include grantees completing planning and implementation guides for the grant categories for which this is applicable. We facilitate peer-to-peer learning opportunities through calls, web-based, and in-person meetings. This includes connections with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, law enforcement, and mental health and criminal justice learning sites. We regularly have webinars with content relevant to the field, as well as distributing information on webinars from other organizations with relevant content. We provide expert trainings to assist with strategic planning and refining best practices for planning and implementation, which includes site visits, resource sharing of key documents, webinars, and trainings from the field, as well as sharing resource developed by past and current grantees. We will be able to provide site visits to some of the grantees for training, planning assistance, and to go through implementation challenges. This includes assisting with data collection, research, and evaluation partnerships, facilitating strategic planning sessions or meetings of criminal justice and behavioral health task force, training on what works to reduce recidivism, promote recovery, and improve outcomes for people with mental illness and co-occurring substance use disorders, helping translate research into proposed policy and practice improvements, and supporting the development of implementation and sustainability plans. We have grantee orientations for all JMHCP grantees each year. This includes content relevant to where the grantees are in the technical assistance process and an opportunity for grantees to meet with each other, share information, and network. JMHCP also hosts national events or conferences for JMHCP grantees that includes national experts and participation by past and current grant cohorts. Starting in fiscal year 17, strategic planning meetings that will be focused on systems planning for counties and law enforcement agencies will also be conducted. As the TA provider, our focus is assisting each jurisdiction to reach their goal as laid out in the program narrative. We work with grantees to help with each area in which the grantee needs additional assistance. We work with grantees to make sure planning phase goes well, as well as making sure that they're set up for success from the first day of implementation. We discuss the program goals, think through stakeholder engagement challenges, target population issues, evidence-based programming, recovery support services, implementation science, data collection, performance measurement, evaluation, sustainability, and other questions that grantees might have as they come up during the planning and implementation phases over the course of the whole grant period. Now I'm going to pass it over to Vanessa West.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa West, and I am the Senior Research Associate for CSR Incorporated, and we are the organization that runs the PMT, the Performance Measurement Tool. And this tool is what you all will report in on the web quarterly for all your data. So let's go over a couple items, and we'll go through this short presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so this is our first page. This is the first page that you'll get to when you click on the Performance Measurement Tools website. So if you notice, it's very simple. It has a notice to PMT users. It'll also have any report notices or any upcoming dates on the bottom page that says Performance Measurement Tools. So what you will do is you'll click on the login. Next slide, please. And this will take you to the front page. This is where you type in your username and your password. And also, after you click through this, this will also take you to all of your grants, because sometimes grantees will have more than one grant open at a time. Can we go to the next page, or next slide, please? Now, here's the PMT reporting schedule. This is very important. So you report into the PMT. You have quarterly data, semi-annual data, and also closeout data. So the quarterly data is what you're required to report on every 3 months. So you'll have 30 days after the end of the reporting period to enter this data. And you're also encouraged to create a report for your records after this. It's very easy to do. You can just print out. There's a button and you can just print out your report. Now, the semi-annual data. Now, you're also required to answer 7 narrative questions semi-annually, so only twice a year. And this is going to go over all of your goals and objectives through that 6 months of reporting data. So any goals you've accomplished, goals that are in progress, any barriers you've come into. So simple questions like that, and they're narrative questions. And then you have your closeout data. This is the data that you will fill out at the end of your grant. So this is when you're about to close out your grant. There'll be a couple of added questions that you'll have to fill out as well for your closeout. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very important slide. I would recommend either writing these dates down or do a screenshot of this slide, because this is for all of your this is when everything is due. So you can see that we have the reporting period. So right now there's a reporting period going through that'll end on March 31st. And those grantees that are in that reporting period right now have until the end of April to submit it. And then the next reporting period, we see April to June, and that's also the PMT measures, so the performance measures, and also the narrative. So we can see when everything is due and what you'll be reporting on. And also I'm going to bring up, you'll see it later on at the end of this, at the end of the webinar, there is some, on the resources page, there is a website, the PMT BJA Performance Tools website. There is a webinar that we did that some of you may have attended that goes over a step-by-step instruction on how to log into the PMT. It also goes over any problems you might incur, like let's say you locked yourself out, you need to change the contact information. So it goes over all of that and how to maneuver through the PMT, the performance measurement tool, and also any frequently asked questions. And that webinar also will go over the questionnaire for the JMHCP. So that goes over the questionnaire. You can print out that questionnaire, and I do recommend printing it out, and that way you can answer all the data, all the questions that will be required of you quarterly, and that way it'll be easy for you to input it into the PMT. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia from CSG to go over any questions that may have been submitted. Cynthia?
Great. Thank you so much, Vanessa, and thank you so much, Michael, Maria, Nikisha, Sarah. I think that was everybody who's talked today. I wanted to encourage anybody who might have some questions to please go ahead and submit them into the Q&A chat box, the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I'm going to try and get to all of the questions that we have today, but if there is a question that you have that we do not get to, we will be posting all of our information on the screen at the end of the webinar, including our email addresses. Please do feel free to contact one of us with any questions that you have. And because there were a lot of speakers today, if you're unsure who to present your question to, feel free to contact either myself, Cynthia, or Sarah, and we will make sure that the appropriate party gets back to you with the right answer to your question. So the first question that came in today was about no-cost extensions. I think there's a theme with some of the questions that we've had. Nikisha, I think this might be for you. Just generally speaking, how does somebody file for a no-cost extension? Is that through GMS? Is that through something else? What's the actual process to do that?
A no-cost extension, you will submit that through GMS, but I encourage you to do it 90 days prior to the close of the grant award, not before then, because you get a better idea of how much funding you have left over and how much additional time you may need.
Great. So not 120 days and not less than 90 days, but around the 90-day mark is okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And along that theme, we have some questions about GMS and GANs. So you mentioned a bunch of different kind of grant adjustment notices, all which need to be submitted in GMS. Do they have a standard approval process time? Do they all get approved at the same time, or do they take different amounts of time to approve? And how long does that typically take in case someone wants to submit, for example, a budget modification GAN?
Well, I can speak on our process, but I'm not sure if OCFO goes through the same amount of days. But typically a GAN itself, and that's probably any GAN, is typically about 30 days for review and approval. Of course, they get reviewed and approved earlier than that. Some of them a little later than that, depending on the extent of the information that's needed and the lag in time when it's submitted back to a grantee and how long they take to get the information back to myself so that it can be moved forward to my supervisor or to OCFO, depending on the type of GAN. Again, that depends, but the average time of window is typically 30 days.
Is that 30 business days or 30 calendar days?
It's calendar days.
It's calendar days. Okay, great. And Michael, I don't know if there's anything different on your end that you would add to that if something gets elevated to OCFO.
And that's the point that I want to make. Depending on how many offices a particular GAN needs to go through will lengthen the amount of time. So if you're talking about something that only will be at the program office level, then naturally it'll come back a lot quicker. But if it has to go through multiple offices within the Office of Justice Program, the program office, it may have to go to OCFO, it could go to another office, you know, within our agency. Naturally, that will extend the time, but I agree with Nikisha that in most cases we're talking about 30 days.
Okay, great. So just to be clear, and I'm going to reiterate that for everybody, for everyone to be on the safe side, if they're going to be doing something specifically, I would say that's budget involved, that implies program operations, or it changes to the scope of work that also involves approval, to make sure that they're allowing enough time for correspondence to go back and forth, and basically a month leeway in order for that to get approved. Perfect. I think this is a question for Sarah and Maria. Have the dates for the grantee orientation meeting set?
For the fiscal year 16 grantees, the date has not been set yet. We're working with the Bureau of Justice Assistance to work through proposed dates, and as soon as we have some, we'll provide that to all of the current grantees, the fiscal year 16 grantees.
And just to follow up with Sarah, we are looking at sometime in the spring. The earliest events would happen in late April or somewhere between April and the end of the summertime, but somewhere in the late spring. Okay. This seems like a common question, Nikisha, for you. How do I change contact information in GMS if I don't have a password?
Okay, if you're listed as a point of contact, you have to be listed in GMS in order for GMS to give you a username or password. If not, then the authorized representative will probably need to call in to have you to receive a username or password for you.
Okay, and I'm going to follow through on that question, and I'm going to assume that it might be unclear about who the point of contact is or the authorized representative if the person is asking. I think if we can move to the next slide, actually, there's a references page. People can contact maybe the GMS help desk to help figure that out?
Yes.
Okay, great. And that information is up on your screen right now. And I would also suggest that if you're still unclear, you could go ahead and email Nikisha or Veronica directly with any of that information. And I just want to make sure that, folks, if you have any last questions, we are a couple of minutes away from the end. We have time for about 1 or 2 more questions, so if there is something else that you'd like to ask, please do go ahead and type that in now. This is a question, I think, both for Michael and maybe Maria. As far as the subawards and when submitting an application, is it okay for the agreement to be a fairly brief standard MOU saying we agree to work with one another, or does there have to be very detailed scope of work when they are submitting their application for a subaward relationship?
I'll take a stab at it and then let Michael follow up.
Okay.
Sure. Well, it doesn't have to be a, it can be an MOU. I think an MOU describes the roles of the agreement between perhaps two entities. I think there needs to be some level of detail, but it doesn't have to be extremely lengthy or extremely formal. It can be an MOU. Michael?
Yes, I agree. Now, here's what I really want to say based on the uniform guidance where they were talking about it really didn't matter the tool or the vehicle that you used. But I'm going to encourage you to be as detailed as possible, only because I've experienced where a primary grantee who did a subaward ran into problems because there wasn't enough detail as to what the subrecipient was responsible for. So whether we're talking about when reports are going to be due, how money will be reimbursed to them, what type of goals and objectives that they need to meet, milestones and deadlines, those are the things that I most run into with primaries saying that they're having difficulties with their subrecipient. So I want to say be as detailed as possible so that not only you as the direct recipient, but also the subrecipient are very clear as to what they're supposed to be doing for this particular project.
Yes, and I would add that those expectations up front can never be too much. If expectations are clear, then management usually follows.
And I would say also from the TA perspective, from our perspective, that the more of that conversation you can have up front, understanding that you don't have firm commitments from your partners yet, but if you're able to start outlining what some of those expectations are when you do get into the planning stages when you receive your award, it makes those conversations a little bit easier. One more fast question, and then Sarah would like to go through a couple of the references and resources that are up on your screen. Someone was wondering if this webinar was the same as the GMS training that's required within the 120 days of the award. And the answer to that is no. When you do receive the slide information, you will see a link to where you can find that training. Sarah?
Great, thank you, Cynthia. So this portion is really important. We have references to different helplines as well as different links that will be useful to grantees and potential grantees. The grants management system, there is a website for that. They also have a help desk which you can call, and there is also an Office of the Chief Financial Officer Customer Service help desk which you can utilize. The Performance Measurement Tool, or PMT, has a website. As Vanessa mentioned, there are trainings available and webinars on that website. They also have a help desk, and they have an email address in which any questions you have related to the performance measurement tool, please contact the help desk or email bjapmt@csrincorporated.com. The Federal Reporting Help Desk is also a useful one, and there's also references to indirect costs. Here's the contact information of all of the speakers on this webinar. So we'd like to thank Maria Fryer, Nikisha Love, Michael Williams, Cynthia Kimmelman-DeVries, and Vanessa West, all for their participation on this webinar. If you're not sure who to contact, feel free to contact me, Sarah Wurzberg, and I can help direct you to the right person in order to get your questions answered. That concludes the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Grants Management and Budget webinar. Thank you for your attendance and participation, and thank you to our presenters. We are very much looking forward to working with you all and answering any questions you might have. We will email a recording of the presentation after the event, and the recording will also be available online within a few days at our website, csgjusticecenter.org/mental-health. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon.